All right, guys, I'm going to pick back up where we left off with a little more discussion on homology traits that we see in vertebrates. And I think it's really important to understand as we think about shared characteristics, the difference between homologous traits and analogous traits. And even when it seems as evidence might point towards a shared common ancestor or relatedness based on morphological traits, that can be really misleading. So this is a great example of the relatedness amongst the gray wolf, coyote, Tasmanian wolf, and the kangaroo. What we see is that although the gray wolf, coyote, and Tasmanian wolf share three characteristics: long snouts, howls, sharp canines, they are very, very distantly related vertebrates. The Tasmanian wolf is much more closely related with kangaroos, and the shared ancestral trait that is important is the fact that they're marsupial mammals, and that the coyote and gray wolf are placental mammals. So that is the homologous trait that shows shared ancestry. The other traits are analogous, which are often evidence of something that we would call convergent evolution. And that's when traits evolved independently of each other, often because organisms are serving a similar function or role in an ecosystem. I've got another example here of homologous forelimbs amongst vertebrates and analogous wings amongst this array of less related organisms. I want to run through some of the features that we see in the various body systems of vertebrates. And a theme here is that we saw a big leap, a big transition in a lot of the body systems as vertebrates move from water to land. And that's important to remember as we run through these. Musculature is one of those that we saw a major shift in the distribution of muscles as organisms moved from water to land. And same with respiration. Gills, of course, allow fish to acquire dissolved oxygen from bathing of the gills in water. Lungs allow our terrestrial tetrapods to gas exchange through a moist membrane. Its gills require really efficient oxygen uptake. Water has about 1/30 of the concentration of oxygen that we find in air. Of course, we also see gas exchange in skin. We see this particularly in amphibians. And in some amphibians, this is the primary strategy that they have for acquiring oxygen. The circulatory system is, of course, comprised of hearts and arteries, veins, and blood. What we see in homeothermic organisms is that really the homeothermy is maintained by the cardiovascular system and through the heart. The heart became progressively divided into the right side that pumps blood to the lungs and the left side that pumps oxygenated blood to the body in our organisms as they move toward homeothermy. And that four-chambered heart, although we saw it evolve first in lungfish, it really was perfected in crocodiles, birds, and mammals as part of that efficient system and in order to maintain homeothermy in those organisms. Digestion is quite diverse amongst the organisms. Fish can ingest food with water that they use for respiration. Some terrestrial vertebrates have really transformed their stomachs into more specialized structures. We see this in ruminants and we see this in birds. In birds, that specialized structure of the gizzard was an adaptation that allowed flighted birds to move away from having the heavy teeth and jaws that we see in some of their ancestors, and to move towards a hollow, toothless beak that allows them to grasp and ingest food and then rely on the gizzard as a more efficient and less heavy way to grind their food, as incorporating it into that digestive system. Kidneys move from more primitive structures to more evolved. Of course, the function of the kidney is to remove nitrogenous waste from the body. The endocrine system is something we see shared amongst vertebrates and its special role with hormones. In some cases, we see hormones in vertebrates that serve different functions. Prolactin is an example of this. Prolactin in birds will stimulate nest building and incubation, but in mammals, it is used for stimulating milk production. And then the nervous system and the evolution of the brain throughout vertebrate evolution is its own fascinating story. And we see the different structures of brains as we go from fish to mammals in the figure on the right. Vertebrate reproduction really has its own suite of strategies as well. And they're pretty diverse. They can be diverse by the method of fertilization. Environmental factors such as light and photoperiod and availability of water can dictate the timing and broodiness of organisms to reproduce. Temperature, rainfall, sunlight, all are influenced even more so in ectothermic animals. And we see a huge difference in age of first reproduction, and that can vary widely in vertebrates as well. And I want you guys to spend some time with this table, because we'll return to this as we talk about each of our vertebrate groups. There are really kind of two strategies that we break vertebrates into as far as reproductive strategies go. R-type strategists, which tend to have population sizes that are seasonally variable. They have way more young individuals in their age structure and far fewer adults. The sex ratio can be variable. They have a population turnover of less than 2 years and often reach sexual maturity in less than 2 years. And they rarely live over 4 years. So think mice and other small organisms, some fish and frogs. They generally have a relatively small body size, and their clutch size and frequency is moderate to large. So quite a lot of offspring, but that leads often to really less direct parental care of their offspring. Their annual reproductive effort tends to be high. And in contrast, we have our K-type strategists. So think humans and elephants and birds in this category. The population size tends to be stable year to year. The adult age class is stable and the most numerous. The sex ratio is variable, but often balanced. And population turnover is often about 1.5 times the age of sexual maturity. And the age of sexual maturity in these guys are usually over 4 years. But of course, in organisms like humans and some others, it's much later than that. Longevity of these organisms is usually more than 8 years. Body size can vary, but clutch size or number of offspring a year is really small generally, and annual reproductive effort is usually low to moderate. So 2 different strategies that really at the end of the day can lead to relatively similar lifetime reproductive output. A few other terms that relate to reproduction are whether the organism is dioecious or hermaphroditic. Dioecious meaning two houses, 2 types, male and female. Whether organisms are oviparous, egg-laying, or viviparous. This difference actually arose 132 times independently. And whether we see external fertilization, as we see with some aquatic animals that release egg and sperm into the water, or whether we see internal fertilization. In some cases, we see delayed fertilization, where organisms will hang on to sperm, often the female, hang on to sperm for a long time before they actually fertilize their eggs, waiting for conditions to be right for reproduction. So spend some time with these terms, and of course, altricial and precocial are terms that we use with birds, whether they're born unfeathered, naked, blind, and totally dependent on the parents, or whether they're born able to run around and fully feathered and able to thermoregulate. Vertebrates play lots of roles in the ecosystem. They form an essential link in ecological processes. They often have close-knit interactions with plants and invertebrates. They play the role of pollinators and seed dispersers, predators and prey. We see quite a few vertebrates that are keystone species that create essential habitat for other organisms. And of course, we see a great dependence on vertebrates by humans, a dependence for protein and fur and skin and oil and feathers. And we have, of course, seen humans for thousands of years work with domesticated animals to meet their own energetic needs. And the graph on the right is just an interesting one to reflect on. It shows the distribution in the number of recognized species in various regions. And of course, we see the neotropics coming in the highest there. I have just a few questions that I thought you might like to spend some time with. This is not an assignment. These were just, I thought, the best questions at the back of the book that will prompt you to think a little more about the lecture today. All right. Thanks, guys. And we'll continue with chapter 2 a little later.